All right, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where your location is. Today's webinar will be titled How Telematics Can Be Used to Reduce Costs. This is part of our Saving Money and Reducing Truck Emissions webinar series. Next slide, please. All right, my name is Trey Pope. I'm with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. I'm an air quality planner. And today I'll be facilitating and moderating today's webinar, during which we'll have a featured presentation from Mary Till with SAWatch Labs, followed by a question and answer session and local updates at the end. I would like to start out also introducing our staff. We have Jason Brown, who's the principal transportation air quality planner. And we also have Juan Baron Luna, who's an air quality planner as well. They'll be helping out in different roles to make sure this webinar goes as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. All right, I'd like to cover some what our Saving Money and Reducing Emissions Truck Emissions program is about. The SMARTE Saving Money and Reducing Truck Emissions program is an initiative designed to integrate the trucking industry with cost-efficient and emission-reducing technologies and strategies. Its objective is to facilitate truck drivers, owner-operators, and fleet managers in achieving their sustainability goals economically. Our approach is centered upon fostering relationships with industry stakeholders and local governments, providing information and resources, as well as promoting the use of smartly verified technology products. As I mentioned earlier, our featured speaker today is Mary Till. Mary is a director of business development for SAWatch Labs, which is a fleet electrification software firm that uses predictive analytics for EV suitability, cost modeling, infrastructure planning, vehicle management, and emissions reporting. SAWatch Labs helps to track and achieve sustainability and profitability goals. Mary has been involved in the fleet industry since 2006. With a global experience, she utilizes data to provide positive behavioral changes, achieving significant milestones such as reducing fuel consumption, improving safety measures, and enhancing fleet management efficiency. And now we'll ask Mary to discuss how telematics can be utilized to produce both cost and emission savings. Mary?
Thank you, Trey. Appreciate that. Thank you for having me here today. I encourage you to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer all those questions that you might have. So feel free to enter those in anytime. Let's go ahead and move to the first slide. Thanks. Yeah, so Trey shared a little bit about our company, SAWatch Labs. We do a lot of work analyzing vehicle data, operational data, telemetry, to help organizations understand how they can electrify intelligently, which vehicle applications would make sense, not just from an economic standpoint, but from an operational standpoint to be electric, as well as how much charging infrastructure you might need to support those vehicles and how that might impact your energy bill, and items like that, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But our company does have a bit of a broader skill set. We are also a reseller for a telematics solution, and that folds in nicely with some of my background that Trey shared earlier. They're complementary service set. We believe that you really need to understand the way vehicles are operating to make good decisions around electrification. But telematics has historically had a lot of value. And in my personal or professional experience, I have worked with multiple different telematics systems in different industries with public and private entities, and just fleets out there doing all different types of jobs and duties. So today I'm hoping to share some of what I've learned in working in that space over this time and how that can relate to reducing cost and emissions. And I'm going to try to cover some real world numbers that fleets have achieved, and some general information about how they got there. So I'm on a team based out of Denver, Colorado. We have some other interesting experience in the group. It's a great team to work for, and we've analyzed a lot of data. We consider ourselves a neutral advisor Not pro EV or electrification or alt fuel, or we might be pro telematics because we believe in the power of the data, but otherwise a neutral advisor. And next slide, please. So just wanted to share some of the partners that we work with on a regular basis. We do have products in the Geotab and Verizon marketplaces, but we work with all different telemetry sets. So I'm personally familiar with other telematics hardware. Our company is data agnostic and works with all different types of telematics providers out there. A few that aren't listed here as formal partners would be Zonar and Samsara and some of the other big players out there today. So certainly we can work with any telematics data set. I think it's fun to highlight that our analytics software was nominated for the Free Electrons program last year. This is 6 utilities from around the world that are looking for new technologies that will help them advance their goals in a cleaner, greener future, essentially. And we were top 15 finalists. And that I'm just really proud of that work because I think it speaks volumes to the integrity of our product. So lots of data. We handle big data. You can see that with some of the numbers you're seeing here. And certainly we'll talk a little bit about how you can use that data today. So next slide. So yes, we're here to discuss, emissions reductions and economic savings that you can achieve through telematics data and a program, right, to support that. Really, it's one thing to have the data, it's another thing to use it, right? So here are some areas that I'm planning on covering today. Probably got a lot of these in mind if you're familiar with telematics systems. Some of these are, historically known to improve your bottom line if you use the data well. Others might feel a little new to you, like using this data for the alternative fuel adoption, for example. And then reporting, I'm going to touch on that briefly because transportation emissions, I think the EPA had estimated about 27% of our GHG emissions. The SEC this year has really been putting some new mandates out there for organizations to report on their transportation emissions, track and report. So, some organizations may just be figuring out what their baseline emissions are from tailpipe, or maybe from charging, which would be kind of a scope 2 emissions. And they need to do those calculations and they need to start tracking those reductions. So I think this is a timely topic based on what we're seeing in the world today and the emphasis on reducing those emissions. And we all saw it, right? When COVID hit and vehicles were grounded, we saw the improved air quality. And I think that's also encouraged some folks to get a handle on that and see what they can do to make change. So next slide, please. So before I get too far down how you can use the data, I thought it would make sense to just do a quick overview of what a telematics system is and what's kind of considered a base kit. So on the left-hand side, I've got some examples of basic hardware. It's typically fairly small form factor at this point. It can even just plug directly into your OBD2 port if you prefer. Most organizations are going to use an installation harness, and that's typically called a T harness or a Y harness. And that is so you can tuck the device up under the dash. It's not visible to the driver. It's not in a uncomfortable location, as sometimes that OBD2 port is located down by the driver's left knee. So it keeps the device secure and your data integrity more sound, less tamper-proof if you've had it tucked underneath. And those harnesses will allow you to have an open available port if the vehicle needs to be maintained, if they need to run an OBD2 scan tool, they can do that. The maintenance team can do that without removing the hardware. So there's lots of great options out there. Some are better than others depending on your industry. If there are questions because you're shopping around and you want me to help you just from a high level, get an understanding of different technologies available, happy to go into more detail with you. So let me know. A lot of times today, this base kit can become sometimes with no upfront expense. Certainly, there's great deals out there or agreements out there for the public entities or 501(c)s. There's some great options out there for commercial companies or privately held companies, and they may even be able to get that base kit with no upfront capital expense. Um, these systems run on cellular data like your phone, so they will have a monthly bill typically. You can sometimes negotiate annual billing, or sign up for a multi-year contract to get a discount, or you can go month to month. So there are different offerings out there, and I've seen all of those things happen with no upfront expense if you negotiate that well, if you have maybe some advantages based on your business type. So I'm hoping to demonstrate that I think it is affordable today, but you have to put the data to use. If you're going to commit to the system and collecting that data, I think you want to be prepared to use that data, right? And then I think you can realize savings, and that's been proven over time with multiple fleets. So it's running on cellular data. The device itself has, a GPS locator, accelerometer, gyroscope. It's got hardware inside, to detect speed, calculate speeds, calculate forward, backward, sideways motions, right? There's equipment inside to measure and report basic data about what's happening inside this black box, right? But furthermore, today, these systems are being connected to an OBD2 connection or a JBus connection, and that allows the device to read data from the engine control module over the CAN bus data stream. And then you can see all kinds of other interesting information depending on your vehicle type. So this could be all the way down to tire pressure of your left rear wheel if your vehicle reports that data, or it could be as simple as getting an accurate VIN number, which is really helpful, right? Because you have to know which device is in which vehicle, or you're reporting potentially on Joe's truck instead of Bob's. So that VIN reading coming across the CAN bus is extremely helpful to just know that your data is clean. It's being assigned to the vehicle you think it is. And that's important for everything else you want to do. On the right-hand side, I have some representations of, some expansions that people do in the hardware space. There's also software expansions I'll talk about briefly, and I'll try to kind of weave some of these items into the presentation. So I have an auxiliary monitoring harness here that can plug right into the side of your base kit, usually. And that can be wired to all kinds of inputs on the vehicle. It could be a switch in the cab. It could be a push button that you've had custom wired to the back of the truck. I've seen some really interesting work done with those. This auxiliary cable I have, you can wire up to 4 inputs. So if you want to know on a police vehicle, if the lights are on, the sirens are on, if the gun rack was being used, you can track all of those activities with these auxiliary cables and then just really advance your reporting. I'll highlight a use case around idling and that auxiliary later. Driver ID. A lot of organizations, they want to track their assets, right? Their vehicles for proactive maintenance. But maybe they want to track their driver behavior for safety, right? And you're sharing vehicles, and so you're not sure who's driving without some identification method. So this is fairly common if you want to sort of separate behavior from asset activity. And then you have both viewpoints in your user interface. You can run reports from both perspectives. Camera, I think, is becoming increasingly accepted by fleets. Samsara is probably a good example of a camera solution out there today. They typically sell the telematics hardware right alongside a camera. Most other systems you can integrate cameras with. Those integrations do look different, which I think can be an advantage because you can get the kind of camera that you want. Cameras today can be road facing as well as driver facing. You can turn on off either of those functions. You can install auxiliary cameras to see the rear of the vehicle or even inside a refrigerated unit. And then I know of at least one that uses what's called a lens sensor. So there's a lens that's facing the driver, but it's not recording, but it is watching, it's sensing. And so if you see eating, drinking, smoking, or any of these things that might be against your policy and you have a rule created, you're not recording your driver doing those actions, but they can get an audible in-cab alert, or, a tick mark on your report for those kinds of behaviors without having to record. So camera is something I would do a lot of homework on when you're looking at a solution. It's a lot of data. You want to know how that's being stored, how it's being accessed, who's viewing that. Some of that is manually reviewed and flagged. Others are using AI, or a combination thereof to detect behaviors. So do your diligence if you're looking at camera. And then I just have a kind of a general software integrations here. So you can think about your base hardware, and that's a great place to start. And then you've got all these hardware and software solutions you can add over time or as needed or from the beginning. But for many, I just recommend the base kit to get started, especially if you're investing in a system that you can easily expand on later. The hardware items are going to have an additional one-time cost. Sometimes, depending on the data, like the camera, you may have an additional monthly fee for those. Software integrations, these can look very different too. It might be an add-on right in your user interface that feels like single sign-on or click-through, like a seamless experience. Or this integration could be you sending information to AssetWorks M5 for vehicle maintenance, and that may carry a cost with AssetWorks in that example, but not with your telematics provider. So if you're looking for solutions, try to understand what those costs are. Do they have an open API? That's what developers use to make those connections to items like AssetWorks. And then really anything's possible. Who would do that development work? Will your telematics provider charge you for that? Or will the third party charge you for that? Who maintains that integration? And is it a flat fee or is it an additional per vehicle per month type fee? So I think the maintenance integration is probably the most popular. Just having accurate mileage without and avoiding manual entry is hugely beneficial. A great first step in better proactive maintenance of your vehicles. And that goes for runtime as well on other assets that might be serviced based on runtime hours. So I recommend whether you're downloading mileage monthly and importing it to your FMIS system, or whether you have a full integration. If you're maintaining your telematics deployment as you should, that should be accurate mileage and reduce a lot of error in manual entry. So wanted to stay there just for a little longer than typical and make sure I covered more about the hardware and how that functions. So next slide, if you would, please. Okay, so another option, you don't always need the hardware that I just went over. Now, obviously, there's some benefit to that. If you want to do some of the expansions, you might need that third-party hardware so that you can add that auxiliary cable, right? But today, really, most all vehicles are coming off the assembly line with an OEM telematics feed. And there are many telematics providers out there that are aggregating those feeds. So you might have Ford, Chevy, Mack. They're all newer. It varies based on the brand who's offering OEM telematics. I think Ford starts around 2018, 2019. Chevy, I think, is a few model years before or after that. So it does vary. You can check your support with the OEM if you'd like. You can talk to your telematics provider about if they're offering an OEM feed. But if you can have a variety of vehicles, and they can be from different OEMs. And if you're able to activate that data stream, that can come into a single platform and be uniform, so you can do all this reporting. So that's it's an exciting change. It's taken a while, I think, to get that partnership between the OEMs and the telematics providers to offer that kind of integration. It can be lower cost because there's no hardware. And I'm not sure I'm seeing it yet, but there should be some advantages to that OEM feed. The OEM knows best what the data means that's coming on the telematics hardware. So there's potential for features, even like maybe instead of a beep, if you're speeding, let's say the telematics device is programmed to beep when you speed. An OEM integration may allow you to broadcast a voice message over the audio in the cab. So cool solutions are coming. I don't know how robust they are yet today. I think they're still working on it, but certainly they're working well in some applications. Next slide, please. So here, there's a combination, right? You can do OEM and you can do third-party hardware, and you can still get everything in one space. So that's just representative of that kind of mix of sources. And you can see there's a yellow iron kind of logo here because you can get John Deere OEM feeds and asset feeds as well in many cases. Next slide. So here, how do you access it? Now you know how to get it, right? You can activate your OEM feed, you can install your hardware, but how do I get that data? You'll have your user interface that you see on the left, of course. We talked a little bit about the API, the application programming interface. Really, you can do anything with that. Sky's the limit, but you need a developer, right, to help you make those connections and pull that data where you want it to go. And there'll be some cost associated to that somewhere down the line. It may not come from your telematics provider, but there's almost always a cost, right? Whether it's a person you're paying an hourly wage or whether it's a third party that's going to charge you to bring that data in. And then there's data connectors now. And the idea behind this is that, especially I think for large scale fleets, probably working with any telematics provider, at some point you have so much data that running a report takes too long, right? It slows down. So a lot of organizations that size are already using big data tools like Power BI or Tableau. So these data connectors are sort of being put out there now by telematics providers to make it easier for a non-developer type to push data from their user interface or cloud host directly to big data tools like Power BI and Tableau. There's usually a cost for that. If you're a very large fleet, you may be able to negotiate no cost because you are waiting for those reports and they might recognize that's a problem. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to kind of weave in some real numbers here as we move through these next slides, and I'll probably try to pick up the pace a little bit here from this point forward. So state of Utah does have a case study out there. That's where, and I've got a reference down at the bottom of the slide. That's where I'm pulling some of this information. And I just think, I know some of the folks at the state, they also have, I believe they used to, I haven't checked recently, used to have a public facing web page with lots of fleet statistics. And then they have their own internal web page that they've kind of developed to manage their fleet. And I don't know, they're doing exciting stuff and using this data to enact change. So I want to share some of that. There's a 1-year pilot. It's about 1,300 vehicles. And that's about 25% of the fleet as a whole. And they grabbed vehicles, I think, from like 5 or 6 different departments. So it was different use types of vehicles of the data that I'm going to share as we kind of move through the presentation. Next slide, please. So safety, we're going to start working through those areas of impact, and we'll try to put some examples alongside that. Obvious ones, reducing accidents. You're going to save money. You're going to keep your people safer. You're going to have less asset replacements, less insurance costs, potentially, less litigation costs. So you want to reduce those accidents. You can do that through proactive detection of aggressive driving behaviors with reports from your user interface. Now there are AI tools that are being used to identify that and help kind of better identify your high risk drivers in using AI. So I think we're going to hear more and more about that advancement. In-cab driver alerts. These are great for training. If maybe you are in the habit of following too closely, you're going to have a lot more hard braking events. What if when you did that, you had a little alert in your vehicle so that you could connect that behavior, with that activity? They have been successful. I did use those quite a bit in the past in a previous role that was more focused on driver safety. We would recommend them as, like a 2-week training tool if you're having trouble with that association. Some organizations opt to keep those on at all times for egregious speeding events, for example, that violate policy. Maybe you want to keep that on if you go over 90 all the time. I don't know. So up to the organization how they want to use those. My recommendation is typically short-term training, and you can see change there. Cameras, of course, talked a little bit about that earlier. Great for exoneration. Great to tell the story of what actually happened in an accident if you have to go in front of court. Can be used as that lens as a sensor or driver facing to identify other negative behaviors outside of what you see through telemetry, like eating, drinking, smoking, etc. And then, of course, lone worker. If you know where your people are, you can help them if needed. And even outside of telemetry, there are personal asset trackers that you can use that run off satellite. You can equip assets in the field where lone workers are, so you know their coordinates if they're not on regular street maps. Multiple use cases of this at my previous employer. One time they airlifted a guy out of Yemen using a lat long from an asset tracker. He was in oil and gas operations, and his communications were severely limited, and he couldn't communicate where he was. But they knew that there was bad activity in the area, and they used the coordinates to airlift him out. So save your people. That's got a great soft and hard cost, right? Next slide, please. State of Utah. So let's look at an example of the safety reduction for that 1-year study of those around 1,300 vehicles. In the graph, you can see the red line is sort of when they started looking at monitoring seatbelt use and driving behavior is what the state did to achieve the savings. So red line, you can start to see a stark difference in the drop of the total cost of accidents for that year-long study. Next slide, please. And next is the seatbelt usage. So now we're seeing an increase of seatbelt usage where we're seeing a decline of costs on the last slide. This is now an increase in seatbelt usage when we started to report on the frequency of seatbelts being engaged, which you can get on some vehicle types through that data that comes across the ECM that I mentioned before. So you have to have that CAN bus or OBD2 connection. The vehicle does have to support seatbelt. Many do. Like anything, it's not perfect, but it can certainly be a good indicator of if you have drivers at risk on a daily basis because they're not wearing your seatbelt. So great to see a real spike in seatbelt usage for the state of Utah. Slide 13, please. Or next slide. It's 13 for me, not for you. Proactive maintenance, moving from safety to proactive maintenance. Telematics has been used for a long time for this. It got even better when we did start to see data coming across the CAN bus, because you can just get such rich data on vehicles over just the what's inside the black box. You're getting really anything you can read on your dashboard, you can report, you can listen and get reported through your telematics device. So I think I mentioned tire pressure earlier. You can get low battery alerts. historically, these are kind of set on your cranking voltage. So you start to detect a weak battery before it's a dead battery. Now AI is being used to tell you exactly when they think your battery is going to fail based on those voltages. So that in itself helps increase uptime for your driver and your assets if you can replace that battery before it's dead. So lots of obvious, I think, wins in this area. I've got another chart from the state of Utah there on the right. So they began to monitor aggressive driving, understanding that increased maintenance costs. They were looking at check engine light alerts and low battery notices, and they were able to, over that year study, reduce their vehicle maintenance costs by $6.90 per vehicle per month. So that's an average of $82 savings over a year per vehicle. And that came up to $90,000 potential annual savings for the state. So just checking engine light and just low battery notices and monitoring aggressive driving. So that paid for the telematics system right there, plus some would be my guess. So next slide, please. Okay, so right sizing, hot topic, I think. We saw budgets get impacted. We've seen operations change, the way vehicles are being utilized change with all the disruption we've had the last couple years. We're trying to reduce emissions. So if we can remove vehicles from the fleet, that can help us maybe pay a higher cost for an alt fuel vehicle or just realize general savings. You can use the data to do utilization and right sizing. You can do that really pretty generally with some of the right reports from your system. There are advanced analytics solutions that can help you sort of virtually remove a vehicle from your fleet and see if you would leave a driver without a vehicle on Monday at 4. So you can take that as advanced as you would like. So for the state of Utah, which is what I'm sharing again here, they had a minimum monthly mileage requirement in order for drivers to have their assigned vehicle. And if they just were not being utilized enough, they would remove those vehicles from the fleet. I think that's pretty typical of certainly state agencies, since they have such a fiduciary responsibility around, their assets. So in the study, Utah identified 340 vehicles in 4 different agencies that didn't meet the minimum monthly mileage standard. And you can see the savings there on the left and the average vehicles miles driven there on the right per month per group. So lots more you can do in the right sizing scenario. I think this is a pretty straightforward example because of the state policy. And how are we on time? I don't know if that's for you, Trey, or Jason. Are we okay on time?
I think we're good. I'm checking the agenda to see what the time slot is. Looks like you've got another 3 minutes.
Okay, great. I'm going to power through. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so energy consumption. This isn't just liquid fuels anymore. You can use this data for charging events. Obviously, you can see a big impact to your bottom line if you can control idle costs, unnecessary idle costs, and make sure that you're just using your assets responsibly generally to lower fuel use and emissions. So you can, through telematics, many times identify or indicate whether you think idling is necessary or unnecessary. You might say operational versus non-operational idling. So an example is if you can monitor your power takeoff, if you have a truck with a lift, a sweeper, you can see is the vehicle running when the PTO is engaged or not. And that is one way that you can get a better look at what is necessary versus unnecessary idling. You can set all kinds of rules around idle times. There are add-ons that will shut the vehicle off if it idles for too long. But you can do a lot just with monitoring the data and the rules around that. Route optimization, lots of integrations around that. That'll help you save some fuel and get where you need to be quickly. And material management, I threw in here. This is really helpful, and route completion too is helpful for public works assets. How many passes should each street get? Are they getting the right number of passes? Are they getting too few, too many? And material management is really around snow removal activity. It's very expensive cost for public fleets. So you want to know that you're putting the right amount of material down and have a good weather response, but also keeping your budget in mind. And next slide, please. Okay, so I'll move quickly through these next couple. You can use this data to understand if your vehicle could be electric. You can model energy intensities with this. Telematics data is reported usually multiple times a minute. So you can really accurately see the speed, the altitude. If you do have auxiliary energy demands because you're moving people or stuff, or you have PTO engagement, you can go far beyond how many miles am I driving a day, and would the OEM battery range work for me? You can really do a granular analysis of what your energy demands would be. Next slide. And that's helpful, right? Because you want to make a good decision. Put EVs where they belong, avoid putting them where they don't. For example, there are a lot of operational limitations to electric vehicles and their availability today. So don't put them where they won't work. Put them where they're going to save you money and be business as usual, least impact to your driver. You need vehicle operational data telemetry to do that, not just an economic comparison. Will it really work for me based on how my vehicles are driving? You can do that with telemetry. Next slide. So hand in hand with that, this is a huge cost for fleets that are being pushed or want to electrify. They know there's savings there on emissions. They know you can save over time, but when will you break even? And how much charging infrastructure do I need? If you know what your energy demands are on your vehicle, like I displayed on the modeling, then you can know also how long those vehicles need to charge. You can predict what time of day they will charge based on where they're dwelling and how long they're there for. And so you can determine the right number of EV chargers and ports. So this saves you a ton of money because infrastructure is expensive. And next. Few quick little things. City of Mankato, there's actually a news article out there. You can Google that if you want to read the whole thing. They did an EV study. They found a lot of potential savings. You can see some of those big numbers on the right. And they're moving forward with that. They've bought several vehicles. They're just starting with 4, and they're getting their infrastructure all discounted from their utility. So if you are doing electrification or you're interested in that, I encourage you to speak with your utility. They may pay for an analysis for you or help you in some ways. I know it's different regionally, and I know Texas can be very different when it comes to utilities, but I am aware there is some support in that region specifically. And let's skip the next slide. Oh yeah, okay, this is a good one to pause on briefly, and then I'm gonna try to wrap. So this is an all-electric fleet, and they're seeing a great amount of savings. They're kind of in my backyard in the Denver, operating in the Denver area. They've been all electric for several years. Their business model supports it. Not everyone's will, right? But they have all their vehicles that are electric. 27 of them out of the 31 are expected to make back savings to break even on their purchase in 3 years from the asset side, from the vehicle side. So not including infrastructure, but really compelling use case for going electric. And then let's see, I've got just a couple slides left. Equipment monitoring, we talked about this a little bit. You can get runtime hours, you can track expensive equipment in the field with fairly low cost asset trackers, lots of different kinds, battery powered, solar powered, some that run on satellite data, some that run on cellular. So you've got lots of options there depending on what your needs are. And let's hit reporting real quickly. Accident reconstruction. If you're saving your people time, then you're saving money. And so that could be calls you get from the public about what your vehicle, where your vehicle was or wasn't, or what your vehicle was doing. Potentially, you can do a quicker investigation. You can file accident reports better. And there's even public facing dashboards to put out some information about vehicle location. Great example, state of Colorado, all of their CDOT plows are tracked and they're reported in, it's not real time because they don't want you to know exactly where their plows are at every moment, but it's on a delay. And I can always see if the highways are being plowed during a winter event. So lots of ways you can shout that out. I think we have an emissions slide. You can report on not just greenhouse gas emissions, NOx, particulate matter, which we know is a carcinogen that's generated not just from tailpipe, but from tire wear. You can track emissions more granularly with this. I'm happy to talk more about that with anyone who would like that. And then the final slide I have is just use your data. Use it. If you're going to invest in the system, get training for new staff. Make sure your devices are reporting. Make sure the VIN is accurate. Make sure you're removing staff when they leave the company and training new staff when they come on. Think about these hardware add-ons and software integrations. You have a business problem. How can we solve it with data? And ask the experts. There's tons of people out there that specialize in using this data with software or consulting. So use it. Share your results internally. Share it externally. Share with your drivers. You know, you have to share it so you can enact change typically. So get connected. If you have questions, let me know. And yeah, happy to talk more on anything. So thanks. That's what I have today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. So I was going to cover some questions. It looks like we may have several here. And Mary, this one, I know you really started off with this really strong explanation of telematics, you know, what it is, you know, involving hardware and software and the interactions. There's a general question here. Is it affordable? What would you maybe have to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I wanted to add up what I had in for the state of Utah, and I didn't get around to doing the math. And maybe that's something I can send to you all later, but it can be affordable. And I think if I added up the math from the preventative maintenance, the safety, the right sizing that the state did, they would have made their money back on that system probably in that year for those vehicles, right? And I think certainly if you start thinking about not just the data that's in the user interface and what I can do with that data, but really think about how I can do advanced analytics or push it to other systems or do this reporting. I think you can realize quite a bit of savings that way. And then there's tons of soft savings, right? Safety of your people and your assets and your image. It's really important to public entities and private entities to report out to the public and show responsibility. So some of those costs are really hard to calculate, but I think it's really, you get a lot of value there in those systems if you take it to that level.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Another question, and I know you touch upon this in a variety of ways on, you know, how it comes into play for reducing costs. There is kind of just a high level question about, you know, what is the best way to reduce cost? Not sure if there's some
Sure.
of those, you know, that you can have takeaways on.
Yeah, I think the heavy hitters I kind of had up front, and it's pretty well understood how to save through safety monitoring and proactive maintenance. You could blow those savings out of the water if you are doing electrification and you right size your infrastructure, because that's just such a hefty cost. So I encourage people to do that if you're going down that path, right? Don't put EVs where they don't belong. Put them where they do. You're saving money on your asset. But then if you need charging infrastructure to go alongside that, that's even more expensive. Ultimately, I think you want to get to kind of a right trip, right tech methodology where you've got really all the right vehicles and the right applications to maximize both economic and emission savings using a variety of fuels, right? So I think the heavy hitters, safety, preventative maintenance, I would start there. If you don't have a system and all of a sudden you're getting accurate mileage, it's game changing. It can be really game changing from a maintenance standpoint. So start there and then grow, I would say.
Great. Yes, I think that's great insight on kind of with all the variety of ways of going about it. That seems, pretty logical to kind of start there. And then for maybe some of the companies that have been utilizing telematics for a number of years, but are there any new technological advances in the marketplace to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think integrating data is, I think the general understanding around the volume and power of this data has come a long way. And we're seeing now AI tools and big data tools against that. And that's pretty exciting to watch. And I think we're making it easier for people that aren't a developer to be able to manipulate that data. I know I touched on that briefly. From a hardware perspective, I mean, the camera technology is getting pretty good with the AI that we have today and detecting events, and the quality of that image capture has come quite a long way. And then EV vehicle support. My understanding is really all telematics providers have had to reverse engineer all the information they're getting from the vehicle ECM. The OEMs don't come to them and say, here's what all these codes mean, right? Here's what all this means. And there are some that are really doing great support for electric vehicles and battery state of charge and things like that. And that's a notable advancement for most of the fleets that I work with.
Yeah, great to hear. We do have a question that came in through the chat. Are NOx and PM the data parameters extracted from engine ECM from telemetric? Sorry.
No, so those are not, and neither is GHG to my knowledge. So they're really calculated based on the vehicle use. So, and there's generally what you want to do is, I actually did a whole presentation on this. So happy to kind of follow up on that offline with more detail, but you want to look at your trusted government sources for what those coefficients are. And then you want to think about, or am I using mileage or runtime? How do I count for tire wear and tear, there's some interesting studies actually coming out on real emissions on electric vehicles, right? You might have a zero tailpipe emissions vehicle, but of course you're charging it and there's energy emissions for energy generation, but also EVs have tires and tires are wearing more quickly on EVs. So they may have more particulate matter from tire use. There's some really interesting things happening there, but it's all calculated. It doesn't come through nice and clean on the ECM. That would be really cool if it did.
All right. And as far as I can see, that I'm not seeing any other questions right now. So we really, really appreciate the information.
Thanks for your time. I feel I've gone a little over, so I really appreciate your generosity there. And if there's anything additional, of course, send it my way and I'll do what I can.
Great. Thank you. I was just going to spend a couple minutes here on our kind of our local updates, I guess is what we're calling it. Sorry about that. So we do want to make a connection with, we've got our webinar webinar series here. And again, our Saving Money and Reducing Truck Emissions program, it's our initiative designed to integrate into the trucking industry for cost-efficient ways of operations, strategies, to think about so that they can make some hopefully informed decisions and improve operations, think about achieving sustainability goals. So one of our approaches is trying to develop our SMARTE vendor directory. And this was, a part of what we want to do is make sure that there's information out there within our region, our North Texas region, to offer local vendors that do sell the SmartWay verified technology. So that's one of the aspects of our program is really to help us connect with some local vendors. And by doing that, we're hopeful that we can get some to develop a list, and those that would be interested, you can complete our vendor directory sign-up form. We do have the form link there, and we really appreciate that so that we can, again, provide that back to our network that we have here locally. And also, we do like to just do a plug the fact that within our North Central Texas Council of Governments, our transportation department is the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, which has a goal to increase efficiency and reduce emissions from transportation. And so to do this by partnering with public and private fleets and hopes to make their fleets more efficient and reduce energy impact. And the team is structured with a focus on 3 areas, and that is the area of fleet and driver guidance and planning, the infrastructure planning and community readiness, and then energy integration. So some of the things the team works to do is support fleets in their efforts to match vehicle and equipment replacements with grant funding to provide for train and educate fleet staff on tools and available resources so they can help them plan for a transition from maybe their current fuel type to an alternative fuel such as propane, natural gas, or electric. And then so how do they do, and what is it that the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities does? This is just kind of summarizing right here on this slide, all the ways that they could help to support fleets as they transition to alternative fuels, working with federal highways to designate alternative fuel corridors, working with the Texas Department of Transportation on implementing the Texas EV charging plan, which is a part of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan. So we also have other zero emission vehicle infrastructure projects that are being worked on, such as the I-45 corridor plan. And this is just a high level, let you know that our particular Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities is part of a larger network across the country and is, kind of uses funding through the Department of Energy. And then so how could you get involved? We definitely just encourage to be able to make sure that folks are aware of what they can, how they can reach us. So we've got a website, something that talks about upcoming events, weekly e-blasts. So we've got a link there to get signed up for those, or a way to sponsor through the Clean Cities. So with that wraps up our information, and appreciate the time that everyone took to join us today. Trey, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank everybody who attended, as well as our presenter Mary. Some very valuable information that we received today.